PA Books is a production of PCN, a nonprofit television network. Listeners like you make our programming possible. To learn more about PCN's mission and to support PCN with a donation, visit PCNTV.com. This link and others can be found in our show notes. We appreciate your support.
This week on PA Books, John Homan, author of Into the Cold Blue.
John Homan is the author of Into the Cold Blue, and he served as a B-24 pilot during World War II. When you look back at a young John Homan in 1943 and 1944, what do you think?
I'm not sure I was thinking straight in those days, but I was only 17 when the war broke out, and I did some hard thinking to do, which is hard to do when you're 17, and looked at the options, knowing I would have to go into service. And my father was in the British Navy during World War I and spent 5 years down in the hold of a ship. And I figured I did not want to do that. And then in World War I, you started talking about trench warfare and gassing, and I did not want to walk in the mud and trenches, and I was looking for options. So one of the options was to become a pilot, even though I didn't have any qualifications.
Where were you when you heard about the Pearl Harbor attack?
It was a Sunday morning, and we were in Danny's ice cream store in Saraville, New Jersey. I was sitting there with a couple other roamers and shocked by listening to the news.
You mentioned the roamers. Who were they?
It was a gang we put together when we were about 16, 17, of 8 or 10 of the same age group in the town. Sort of a gang. Jackets and so forth.
After the Pearl Harbor attack, were you expecting to go into the military right away?
No, I was 17, I couldn't. So I had already applied for a job at Hercules, and the head of the draft board was a employee of Hercules, so I worked with him quite a bit. So I asked him how many people he had ahead of me if I volunteered. He said about 3-4 months. So I was in a position where if I quit my job I had, which was a poor one, a very low pay job, because I was only 17, I would, if I quit that and didn't take the job at Hercules, I'd be unemployed for about 5 months or so until he caught up. So I just told him to put my name on hold, and I'd see what I wanted. When I studied it and decided I wanted to be a pilot, I went to talk to the people that I had to talk to. They said you need 2 years of equivalent education. So that started me on my trek.
At what point did you finally go into the military?
At the end of that year, what would that be? Pearl Harbor was in what year?
1941.
42. Somewhere near the end of 42.
And
I went back to high school. I knew the high school teacher. We just started a new one, and I knew the principal. I went back and asked him if I could go to work or back to high school and take all the math and algebra and geometry and so forth. I could as fast as I could. He agreed, so I went to the Hercules boss and asked him for work study second shift. So I went back to high school for a while to cram on all those subjects.
how did your parents feel about you joining the military?
My mother didn't want me to join at all. They were both immigrants from England. My father spent 5 years in the English Navy, starting when he was 15 or 16. And my mother lived in Hull, England, right on the coast. And she remembers, of course, World War I, with the gases and the trench warfare and so forth. So she was against me going into service.
Once you went into the service, what was your training like?
The training, well, let me go back a little bit. I got the schooling I wanted. Then I found out the best way to get in the Air Force is join the Army. So I went to the fellow that was running the draft, and I said, I want you to draft me, but don't say you drafted me. Or no, say you drafted me, but don't say I volunteered. So I volunteered to go in the Army after I found out that was the fastest way to get in the Air Force. So I went to Fort Dix and talked to them, and they sent me over to the airport at Fort Dix to take tests. I took one day over there and 2 days. About a week later, I was on a train. They called us all out at midnight. We went down and boarded the train, and they were ready to leave, and the clerk got on and called two people off, and I was one of them, which meant I accepted to try out for pilot training. From there, they sent me to Long Island, to the Air Force Base in Long Island, just to stand by until it was my turn.
How did you like being in the Army? Was it a big change going from being a civilian to being a soldier?
Yeah, the freedom was different. You know, you couldn't come and go as you wanted. When I was growing up in New Jersey, we sort of a free deal. When I was in New York base, I asked the lieutenant for a pass to go back home for a weekend, and he said no. And you know, being a civilian, I might have done something else than I did. And so I walked outside and I asked the soldier, I said, how do you get out of here? And he said, well, just take any piece of paper and wave it in front of the guard and walk out. So I did it and went home for a few weeks.
At what point did you start your pilot training?
Oh, that was down the road a while. Yeah, we was in Mitchellfield, Long Island on casual duty until our turn came to go even be tested. So it was snow removal, and I was guarding a coal pile with a rifle I'd never seen before or never shot before at midnight when it was 0. And on KP, and then shoveling snow off the ramp for, maybe a month. I wound up in the hospital with pneumonia. Got out of there, and fairly soon they sent us to Nashville, Tennessee, which was nothing more than a testing ground.
What were the tests like? What were they testing you for?
Well, if you applied for pilot training, you had a real battery of tests. Of course, all the physicals, as tough as you could get at physicals, hearing, eyesight, reflexes, and they tested your reaction time. They even gave you a lecture on psychology. They tested for everything they could think of. They even had automatic machines where you had to test your coordination. They had one I remember that had lights with numbers on and keys down here, and they turned the light on and they tested your reaction time to hit the right key while somebody was whispering numbers in your ear. So they all sorts of testing.
Did these tests determine whether somebody was a pilot or a navigator or a bombardier?
Yeah, that sorted you out. If you were a pilot, they checked that out, and if you're a navigator material, they put you in that category. It meant where you went next.
Once you finished up in Nashville, where was your next duty station?
Well, once they checked me out as a pilot, they had to wait until classes opened up in what they called pre-flight training. It's really a school, a month, 6 weeks of military training with no flying. It was just like West Point Academy rules. You had to be attention when you walked out. Nothing but physical training, schooling, and military training to get your attention that you were in service. There was no flying involved there for the first 6 weeks.
How were you and your classmates treated by the upperclassmen?
And it was like West Point. They had upperclassmen could haze lowerclassmen. If you walked out of your room, you had to be strict attention. When you ate a meal, you ate a square meal at strict attention this way. And after half the time, you became the upperclassman then.
So once you got through with the classroom part of it, at what point did you start flight training?
Well, we were sent to Sutherfield in Americus, Georgia. It was a civilian operation run by civilians with military guidance. Grass field in a small town of Americus. No tower. The airplane was a Stearman PT-17. Had no self-starters. You had to crank a dynamo up in order to start it. And no flights, no lights, and no instrument flying. It was a very simple airplane, bi-wing. So that was your first chance. Most people had never been in an airplane like me when they started it. And of course, the first step is to take off and land, and there was just a big grass field with a what do you call it? A wind direction flag. And you kept doing landings and takeoffs and landings and takeoffs for about 10 hours. And if you couldn't do that, then you were washed out. Certain percent washed out at that point. Either they couldn't do it or they didn't like the idea of flying. And once you said you were good, once the civilian said you were good enough, you got a check ride with a officer, a Air Force officer. And if he checked you out, you went to the next stage, which was aerobatics. That was doing spins, stalls, loops, slow rolls, snap rolls, and all that upside down in an open cockpit. And you started there, and it was funny, a little story that the day I was going to do that, some people went into town and found some, it was dry town, and they found some drink. It was champagne, so we were drinking champagne that night. And the next day, the instructor was going to have me do a loop. And he got around the loop, and I just shook the stick and gave him a signal that I wanted to go down. He just shook his head okay, went down, forgot about it. The next day, we went up and did a loop. That was also an area where a lot of people washed out because you had to do slow rolls, snap rolls, loops. If you couldn't do that precisely, like the check rider would take you up and say, I want 2.5 turn spin to the left. And you had to do it 2.5 turns, period. If you couldn't do that, you were washed out. So about at the end of that period, about half the class was washed out.
Once you completed that phase of training, you moved on to the next phase. You flew a BT-13 Vultee.
Right.
How did you like that airplane?
I think it was a terrible airplane. It was clumsy, heavy, not nice to fly. It was too the cockpit was too large for guys with ordinary legs. It had very hard or nasty stall characteristics. The day we went to that airfield, we were all down on the flight line being introduced to the new officers, and the plane was taken off and got pulled up like this and flipped over on the runway and killed himself. Had very nasty stall characteristics. So they called us about face, and then we started flying the next day. Now, my instructor there was, I don't know what you would call him, but I wouldn't put him on that job. He was when we were practicing landing on the field, I went and picked him up, and he hopped on the wing and said, "Who the hell do you think you are?" And he mentioned a name. I didn't even know who that was. I went back to the barracks. It was a race driver. So that was his way of telling me I was taxiing too fast. His favorite saying was, grab your left ear with your right hand, grab your right ear with your left hand, and pull your head out of your ass. And when we finished the day training and landing, then we got some more training in it. And then we went for, we haven't had any night flying yet. We started night flying at the same field that was away from the main field. They had a light truck, and they used another plane with a pilot in it as a tower. So we started landing, and I could feel him on the stick, and I figured, well, I better land the plane, and I get on until we get the hell off. So he landed about 4 times without me doing a thing, and then asked me to taxi over. He hopped out of the car, and he said, out of the plane, and said, "Go ahead, don't kill yourself." You know, I went over and took off, going around the circular, and getting in the line up for land. There was 2 or 3 in line to land, and I was finally second in line. And the tower, which was a plane on the ground with a pilot in it, told the plane ready to take off to hold its position. There was a plane on the approach. That was a plane in front of me. So this fellow didn't understand or didn't listen or something, and pulled out, and this plane in front of me landed right on top of him. Killed him and skidded off and took out the light truck. And I just poured the coal to him, pulled up, circled. Pretty soon the radio came on, all planes in the air returned to base. Here I was, I never did a landing at night, told to go back and land at the base. That was a scary deal.
At what point in your training were you selected to fly multi-engine aircraft?
After you finish basic, they either go to single, most people wanted single engine, but there were only a few that got that job compared to bombers. Because the B-25, the B-26, and the B-24 were all double pilots.
So once you started doing multi-engine training, you eventually moved into the B-24. Did you like flying the B-24?
Well, first of all, you went to the twin engine training, which was in Valdosta, and most of that was instrument and night flying. We go night cross countries all the way down to the bottom of Florida and back, and doing night training as far as navigation is concerned, finding a home base and using radio compasses. And we used a different instrument landing system there too, for A and N signals. And once you finished that, you were reassigned then, and I was assigned to B-24s.
Talk about the B-24. What was it like to fly an airplane that big?
It's probably it's awe-inspiring. We sent to Casper, Wyoming. That was 5,000 feet up in the air in the wintertime and just cold as get out. And you're, at that point, they didn't have electric flying suits. We had these old bulky fur-lined boots and seats, and hats, and the basic is that the temperature drops 2 degrees for every 1,000 feet you go up. So if you're at 5,000 to start, and then you go up to 20,000, you're way below, you're down near zero at 20,000 feet. First of all, you had an instructor with you for a while, and then you just did practice landings and takeoffs and feathering engines, which is stopping an engine and indicating that you lost an engine and what you do and how you feather it and how you get it back in. You go through all the emergency procedures. And then you do simulated bombing runs. We were there about 4 or 5 months until we were sent out. They had a practice bombing field in North Texas in the Panhandle with lights so you could bomb day or night and then take pictures of it to see how good you were. And our last test was to fly from Casper, Wyoming to St. Louis and back in one day and bomb a factory with a film camera. So we went, this was a long-term flight, probably 10 hours or more. We flew all the way there and bombed. On the way back, we were over the mountains, so we had a storm. And the plane started icing up, and the airspeed went down, and we quick put the heat on and did a 180 and asked the navigator where the nearest field in Nebraska was where you could set down. That was one of the last flights we had in the country.
Now, at one point, there was a bombing of an oil field?
Yeah. There are oil fields in north in the Panhandle, and with the lights on them. And sometimes you mix the light up with the target light. People may drop them. They were nearly 5-pound warheads. All they did is make a flash. We took a picture of it. Did no damage.
At what point did you find out you were going to England?
Well, first we accepted a brand new B-24 right off Willow Run. Signed a receipt for $185,000. We had right off the Willow Run assembly line. So we had a chance to cut 2 weeks to check that out, and everything was right on the plane. There was nothing wrong. And then we got orders to fly from Wyoming to Maine to Nebraska, and then to Maine, and then up to Goose Bay, Labrador. So we flew that across the Atlantic to England.
What was it like flying across the Atlantic?
Long and boring. Most of it was at night. We took off at dusk, flew between 2 layers of clouds all night, 14 hours, and we put it on autopilot. And the navigator got a couple of shots at stars, and he said, correct, and we just adjusted the autopilot. He took us right to the airfield in Scotland. But 14 hours in the cockpit without moving is kind of hard.
When you arrived in England, what were your first impressions?
Well, we were in the clouds, and we finally got in touch with the English radios, and they vectored us into the landing. And then the landing field in Scotland was just loaded with all different kind of planes. Sort of awestruck looking at all the different planes there. But they took that nice new plane away from us, and we never saw it again. We went to a replacement depot, a people depot, went to Ireland then, where they had a reserve for crews. If one of the groups were had lost a plane, they just called over to Ireland. They sent another crew over, and that's what happened to us. The 49th was a brand new crew group that was just sent to England before we got there, and so we were assigned to the 49th bomb group.
Was your crew, the group of men you were with, were they the same people you trained with?
Yes. The crew stayed together the whole time.
Who were some of the men in your crew?
Well, you had a nose gunner, Dalglish, you had a bombardier, nose gunner was Prescott, bombardier was Dalglish, and navigator Reeves. The other pilot was Predge. Radio operator was Leonard. And a top engineer was Wagner. Waist gunner was Cochran, the tail gunner Long, and the ball gunner was Bunch.
Now, what base did you go to once you were finally assigned to a unit?
We went to a base over in Halesworth, England. It's about 5 miles in from the North Sea. It was a base occupied by a fighter group, so everything was there. All the buildings, the runways, tower. Now, your squadrons were scattered. Don't forget this wartime, and Germany may have sent and did send planes over to disrupt the airfields. So the squadrons were scattered all over in woods. I never knew where the other 3 squadrons were. And the squadron was just Nissen huts, Bluchen's building, a administration house, and bomb shelters, and that was it.
So once you arrived at your unit, was there an initial period of training?
1 practice mission. You had 1 practice in England, that was it.
Now, your unit was there during the time of the D-Day invasion. Were you involved in that?
No, I got there just after it. They started flying missions maybe a month before D-Day.
So as you were preparing for your first combat mission, what were you feeling at that time?
I can't tell you. I don't know. Naturally, a lot of apprehensions of what it was like, but your training was so long and so hard, you figured you were trained up to be up to it.
What do you remember about your first combat mission?
First combat mission I remember clearly is it's a Kiel shipyards at the east end of the Kiel Canal. So we could fly over the North Sea, away from, further away than any fighters could reach us. And it was a beautiful day, and it was sunshiny, and we were flying into like nothing. Then we got to the target, and they said the flak was light, but we got hit with some flak, and I looked up and I saw a string of bombs go down through us. I looked up and the B-17s were bombing the same target we were, and a string of bombs was going down through our formation. So it was uneventful except that one little time.
We'll be back in a moment with the PA Books Podcast.
Enjoying this podcast? Please support PCN with a donation at pcntv.com. This link and others can be found in our show notes. We appreciate your support.
So once you started flying combat missions, what was life like? What kind of routine did you have?
Well, you have to go into a typical mission, I think. A typical mission is you're awakened by a clerk, maybe anywhere from 2, 3, 4 in the morning, and you go to the Bluchen building to get squared away. You had to shave, or the oxygen mask would rub you raw. Then you get transportation to breakfast, And you had that, then you got transportation to the briefing room. There they lock the door, and, like in the movies, they pull the flag apart, or they carry it apart, and you see the route in and the route out, and they tell you what target you're going to go and what you can expect. After that's done, they give us a sheet of paper that gives us all the code words you need if you're going to make a call. They show the route in and the route out. And then you go to the equipment room where there you have electric flying suits, a flak jacket, a Mae West, steel helmet, electric flying suits, escape kit. You put all this information. We took infantry helmets, we beat the sides out so we could put them on over air pieces. Got all that equipment and then got another ride out to your plane. And everybody had a job of checking out their area, pilots to check out the plane, and with the ground crew, have a talk with them. And you wait, and pretty soon it's signal to take your positions, and then a flare from the tower told you to start when to start engines. Another flare told time to taxi. Now the taxi went all the way around the field, the taxi lane, so it came in two lines to the takeoff runway. So you had two planes on the runway ready to take off at all times with a flare gun from the tower. And it still may be dark.
So once you took off, how did all these planes form up together?
Well, you had what they called an assembly plane. Ours was called a Little Cookie. You took turns playing, and it was a completely barren B-24 with no guns and light. And that went up and flew in a designed circle and shot a colored flare, which was the color of your group. So once you got airborne and you got up, you looked for that color, and all the planes assembled on that until you had your whole formation, and then the assembly plane could fly back to base. And then you had then you had a lead plane that took over.
Once your unit was formed up and you headed off across the English Channel or the North Sea, what was that feeling like when you flew over occupied Europe?
You became a lot more alert. They knew mostly where all the English, or where the fighters were based, and where the aircraft guns were based, but the Germans put aircraft guns on flat cars and moved them around at night, so you didn't necessarily know where all of them were. So you were alert then to fighters and flak.
So as you were flying towards your target, was there a pattern of fighters and then flak, or were they happening at the same time?
Well, you had what they call a approach run, which was about 50 miles long, which you flew practically straight and level to get all the formation the way you wanted it. You tighten it up to get a better bomb pattern. Radio silence. You threw chaff out, which was like tinsel to supposedly cloud the sky for the aircraft fire. Then finally you got to the target, and most likely you had a very good flak barrage at the target.
So take us into the cockpit of the airplane. What is it like when you're being attacked by German fighters?
None other than being alert, and if you see something and you call one of the gunners and tell them, look at this. We were attacked on the second mission and pretty hard, and then on subsequent mission, I called it nose in the top turret, and I said, there are two bogeys about 10 o'clock high. They said they didn't see them. And I said, look again. He's a blind guy. And then I looked closer, and there were two specks on my windshield. So I called them back and said they went away from us. You were doubly alert sometimes after you got hit.
Did you have a fighter escort with you?
Most of the time, yes. The P-51s were a godsend. They were a superior plane to anything the Germans had.
How did you get along with the P-51 pilots when you were back in England?
Well, we lost an engine once back in Germany, and tried to come back with it, but couldn't, had to feather it. No way we'd keep up, and so we had to come back alone, and I called the code word for fighters. And I called and said, hello, brother, this is so-and-so, we're at reference point, so need some help. And they said, we got you covered. And I said, I don't see you. And he said, look up, and there's two P-51s about 5,000 feet above us. And I said, I see you now. And they covered us all the way back to England. And if I were in a bar with them, I wouldn't buy them a drink, I'd buy them a bottle.
How long were these missions?
Oh, anywhere from 6 to 10 hours maybe. If you went to Munich or places Rostock, it was a fairly long time by the time you took off and landed.
And what altitudes were you flying at?
The B-24 was not much good above 20,000 feet, so it was normally between 18 and 20,000. It had a different wing than the B-17. It had a new design where you had better lift and higher speed than the B-17.
Was there a rivalry between B-24 pilots and B-17 pilots?
Not that I know of. Not that I know of.
When you were in England, did you have a chance to get off base?
Several times. They passed to London 2 or 3 times, what they called a week leave at a resort. London was a wild city during the war because all the nationalities that were fighting were there. My first trip to London, I got off the train and started walking, and the buzz bombs were coming out. One on the other. I thought the buzz bomb was a sporadic thing, but they shot about 7,000 to 8,000 of those things over. And I was walking down the street, and an English man with an umbrella and a Hamburg said, son, he says, I don't think you should be walking out here like this, especially with the glass in the doorway. He said, there's a shelter right up here, I'll take you and show you. So I checked in the hotel, and the buzz bombs were still coming over, so I asked the fellow at the counter where I could go to just get a nice sandwich and a glass of beer and get out of the range of these things, and he told me. So I went out and got in a cab, and a paratrooper sergeant jumped in the cab with me. And he said, what do you fly? And and I'm a first lieutenant or second lieutenant, and he's a sergeant. And I said, what do you care? He said, never mind, what do you fly? So he was insistent, so I told him B-24s. He says, you're okay then. He said, asked me where I was going. He said, I'm going with you. So he stayed with me most of the day. And then I told him I had to go meet the crew for dinner. And I asked him what he was doing. He said, well, C-47s dropped them not as a group when the night before the invasion. And they took heavy casualties. And he said they were going around London beating the shit out of C-47 pilots. So that was my first day in London.
How many missions were you required to fly?
You're supposed to fly 35. Our group was disbanded over there to come back to the States, and when I had 34 in. So I got by with less than total.
So as you started getting more and more missions behind you, how did that change your experience of the war?
I think you get more nervous. You're thinking, you know, the odds are going to get you sooner or later. So, but you still got in the cockpit and did your job.
How heavy was your unit hit with the casualties?
We were only in combat about June, July, August, September, October, November, maybe a little over 5 months, and we had 180 killed and lost somewhere around 40 airplanes.
Did you lose anybody on your crew?
No.
Was that unusual to have an entire crew get through their missions?
I don't know. You know, we had one other crew officers in this with us, and that was it. We didn't really mingle with the other crews.
When you came back from a mission, what did you do?
Well, there was a routine you had to go through. You had to put your plane back in the hard stand. There were hard stands all the way around the field. These were circles where each plane parked. So you had to go and park it there. And then the crew chief was in charge of maintenance. He came over and you were over the plane with him, checking for all the damage and explaining anything that might be wrong with the plane. Fill out a form, and then get a ride back to the equipment room, turn that in, then get a ride from there to intelligence where everybody was debriefed on what they saw at the mission. From there you went to mess hall. And it may be already dark again, and sometimes you went and looked at the bulletin board and you were going out again the next morning. Twice we had 4 in a row. Up at 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, get back at dark, get up again.
Now you mentioned in the book that sleep deprivation was a problem.
That's right, it was. You had a hell of a time. You didn't have a hell of a time sleeping because you fell asleep fast, but you had a hell of a time getting enough sleep.
So with the length of these missions, how did you stay awake during the missions?
I don't know. We didn't have coffee aboard, and I didn't drink coffee. So we had nothing to drink or eat on board. It's just that the excitement of flying formation and so forth probably kept you awake.
What types of targets did your unit focus on?
All kinds. We had the 2 types of missions. You had tactical and there was one other type mission. One was helping the troops, and the other was hitting targets of opportunity. So most of our missions, I'd say 80% of them were in Germany with fixed targets.
Now you also flew missions in support of Operation Market Garden. What were those missions like?
We only had one, and that was the one that almost did us in. We got up, one afternoon we were alerted for a practice mission. And we went out, we had a practice mission, and we were flying formation on the deck. And nobody ever did that, and we didn't know why we were doing it. And the only reason we could come up with is that we might have a drop delayed action bombs on a target, so we wouldn't blow ourselves up. When we went back, we still didn't know what we were doing, and then we got up the next morning, alerted, went down, and we found out that overnight they had loaded our plane with supplies. And we were going to fly a low-level supply mission to the paratroopers. But we got over the Zyder Z, and a chunk of something hit number 3 engine and made the cowling all flared, but it didn't kill the engine. It wouldn't get the proper power, but it still ran. So we figured we could continue. And the lead plane missed the target area twice. So each time we made a big circle to come back so that we could get lined up to drop the supplies right where we were supposed to. And each time we went over Germany, and there was farmers standing outside shooting at us with shotguns or other guns. Then we did this 3 times around. And we finally got clear enough to go in and drop our supplies. There wasn't a big area, and they were wooded there on the side. And we dropped by squadron, not by groups. The area wasn't that big. So the group in the squadron in front of them, I saw lost 2 planes go down right in front of us, just boom, boom. And it was our turn to go through, and we got hit hard. Hit number 4 engine, knocked it out, hit the hydraulic accumulator where the hydraulic fumes came out of 1,000 pounds and just made a fog in the cockpit. We thought we were on fire, and it nicked the radio operator was standing between us. It nicked him in the fanny. What else? So we had a problem. We had a power out, a low power on number 3, no power on number 4, and we were down around 500 feet. So we had to scramble to get that. And part of the left tail was shut off. So we had to scramble to get that wing back up and get some power on the left side, because if you lose power on this side, you can't just automatically overcome it, because you may overpower it and you can't hold it. So we had to jockey the engines and just almost hit the treetops before we leveled it off. Leveled it off and got up to about 800 feet and figured we'd not fool around with the power anymore. We were running, and so we stayed at 800 feet and went to England. And in England, they had an emergency field, which is 10,000 feet of concrete and then 5,000 feet on each end of grass for cripples. Since no hydraulics, we had no brakes. We picked that emergency field, and there was a plane burning on the right side of it, so we had to pick the left side of the runway. As soon as we touched down, the tire on number 2, the left tire just shredded and went down on the wing and went off the runway. That plane was scrapped.
What was your final mission?
It wasn't a tough one. It was to help patent the Mets formations that protected the Siegfried line. And he wrote a letter to one of our generals and said he needed some help with some big heavy stuff to hit that. That was my last mission.
So after you landed and you got out of the plane on your last mission, what did you do?
I had to go through the normal routine of turning in your equipment and going through intelligence. Went up and got something to eat, but then instead of going home or back, I went to the bar. And since I knew I was not going to fly the next day and it was over, I drank about. And we had to walk through the woods to get to our quarters in the blackout. So I walked through the woods in the blackout, and I hit something, something hit me, so I hit that. Found out it was a tree. So I got bombed.
Now, while you were in England, you had a chance to visit Hull, England. What was that experience like?
Oh, that was great. It was my mother and father came from Hull when they were in their early 20s, and his parents still lived there. So we went to a flak home over in Southport over on the Irish Sea, and I took a train over to Hull and visited them, spent 3 days with them. That was great. I was the only child of 4 to see our grandparents.
So with your final mission flown, when did you go home?
I think there was about a 2-week delay in sending me to a depot where you lined up transportation to come back. And I finally got on a small cruise ship, which came back in December. It wasn't a very big ship at all, but it was in convoy. We still had submarine problems, I guess, and so we were in a convoy coming back. We hit one hell of a storm. I never thought I'd ever see anything like that. The bow went up like this, and then the stern would come right out of the water. It'd go down like this, and then come up like that. And there was a oil carrier near us under ballast, and that just went through the water. All you saw was the bridge. Then a small aircraft carrier escort, I guess, and it washed the number off the bow. So we had about 3 days of that. And then all of a sudden we hit warm water. We must have been right into the Gulf, and we were up on deck in our shirt sleeves. We came past the Statue of Liberty on the 23rd of December. And at dusk, and a slight fog or something, and the boat was just gliding like it was on glass. And we were all up on the deck watching the Statue of Liberty. That was I don't know what you would call it, but it was a big relief to see that. Then they went to the Brooklyn Navy Yard, put us on a train, and took to Camp Kilmer, worked all night, gave us our passes, and Camp Kilmer was only 2 bus rides away from my house. So I was home Christmas Eve.
How did you feel walking back into your home?
Can't say, I really can't say. It must have been something.
When you came home and you saw your girlfriend, what was that experience like?
In a way, it was great. In another way, after I was home a while, and she took me to meet her friends and so forth. She was a junior now. She had a scholarship to go to New Jersey College for Women. She was a brainiac. So she was a junior, well-educated, sophisticated young lady. And I don't remember that. I remember her as a fun-loving high school kid. So I didn't like her then, and told her so. So we parted ways, and I had to leave, and she called me. I didn't answer her. I answered her, but didn't do anything. Then I came to my senses and said it's not her fault that she is a sophisticated, educated young lady. That's what she went to school for. And then I was a dumb bomber jockey. So we got back together.
So the war was not over yet. What were you assigned to do during the second part?
We were assigned to the training section in southeast in Georgia. And I checked out in B-25s at these people that drove 50 missions in B-25s in the South Pacific that really knew them, trained us for a while, and then we went to Albany, Georgia, to train West Point grads to get their wings. At West Point, you could graduate for Air Force or Army. So those that took the Air Force got the primary and basic training finished, but they didn't get their wings, final training. So we were there, and they did this in B-25s. So we were there, another fellow, myself. were instructing the West Point grads to get their wings. And then I was sent, we were both sent out to Texas to go to the instrument instructor school. Spent a week, I think 5 or 6 weeks out there learning how to be an instrument instructor. Then back to training again.
Where were you when the war ended?
The war in Europe ended and they started closing all the training bases. And so when they closed ours, I was sent up to St. Joe, Missouri to check out in the biggest transport plane they had, a C-46. The choice then, not the choice, but the option in fighting Japan was that they figured it'd take 1 million men and tremendous amount of supplies to do it. So what they were doing is beefing up the air supply routes. And I was sent to do that. And I was just checked out in C-46s when they dropped the atomic bomb.
So once the war was over, what did you do?
I think I had a drink. Checked you got out of the service on the basic of numbers. That's the time in the service, time overseas, time in combat. So I had enough numbers to get out. So I checked on that. Fairly soon I was sent to Dayton, Ohio, and just sent, out of the service, home. I was home before, I think a month before Christmas, when the war ended.
And when you returned home, what did you do in your career after that?
I went back to work at Hercules where I had a job. I got married right after my wife graduated from college. 2 days after she graduated, we got married. And we were married and had a young daughter. And started talking and I decided that I should take advantage of the GI Bill. So I had to go back to night school, Rutgers Night School, to make up some credits. And I went to Rutgers Night School, Rutgers Day School for 4 years, got a degree, 2 degrees. All the time I had a part-time job working for J&J.
Well, we've been speaking with John Homan. He is the author of Into the Cold Blue. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Listeners like you make PCN programming possible. Full episodes of PA Books, as well as other PCN programs, are available to stream with the PCN Select app. To learn more about PCN's mission and to support PCN with a donation, visit PCNTV.com. This link and others can be found in our show notes. We appreciate your support.